Yo everybody, what's going on? This is Keegan from Kman Reviews. If you enjoyed this review, make sure you hit that like and the subscribe button. And if you have any opinions at all that you would like to share, make sure to leave them down in the comment section. Midnight Samurai, Training Sessions Volume 3, Benevolence. Midnight Samurai is an American producer, beatmaker, and underground alum, someone who personally reached out to me via DMs and asked me to review one of his projects, and I was more than happy to, so I decided to pick his most recent full-length album, Training Sessions Volume 3, Benevolence. And you know what? Let's just dive right in. What are my thoughts on this album? Let's find out as I review it, track by track. We will start with the singles, with there being two of them. The first being Blackjack, and this is quite the melancholic beat. The dominant melody is piano and strings, but the strings really stand front and center with this somber tinge dancing with the piano, making for a light yet pensive instrumental. I love the subtlety of the bass and percussion, not interfering with the melody and not disturbing the vibe of the song. If you ask me, it does make for a peculiar lead single. I think this would have had a stronger effect had this been in the middle or later leg of the record, and as more of an emotional climax rather than being the second track and lead-off single. But this is a nice hypnotic instrumental, and even though the string motif is uniform and doesn't deviate at all, it's brief enough to where it doesn't overstay its welcome. Great song. And the second and final single, the opener, Honeymoon, the longest track on the album, just over 4 minutes. Now, I was instantly worried going into this one because instrumentals typically have a hard time gripping me for extended periods of time, especially hip-hop beats, and thankfully this one doesn't stay stagnant the entire time. The first half starts off with this luxurious, sweeping melody, feels quite grandiose with the sampled vocal melody, and what sounds like a murky guitar riff and watery synth blasts, but just before the halfway point the instrumental gets stripped back a little bit to a slightly funkier, more bass and drum-driven beat. The little vocal melody on this one is different. It's kind of garbly, but doesn't make the song any bit unsettling or eerie. It just has a nice vibe to it. I'll admit it's not a favorite of mine, but I do think this works well as the opening, and I can see a talented rapper dominating this beat, easy. Now for the rest of the tracks. That's All Folks feels like quite the typical beat for this underground hip-hop scene, or at least for me. It's not too mind-blowing, but I do really enjoy these soaring strings, delicate piano work, and the vocal sample is incorporated quite well, especially when it syncs up with the melody. The percussion also has an appealing snap to it. It's another great vibe of a track. Don't really have too much else to mention about it. Fall Damage is quite the jammin' beat. It's got a bit of jazz sprinkled through it. The slashing synths and the obscured horns ringing behind them are so inherently uplifting, and when combined with the bass and percussion, I don't know how you can't at least sway along to it. Again, I'm also happy at this track's length. It serves very well and doesn't get tiring. Another track I just don't have too much else to add. It's fun. Floor 31 / Save Me Please is pretty much two separate beats fused into one song, hence why the slash is there. So let's start with the opener, Floor 31. Not gonna lie, this sounds like elevator music. Maybe that was implied by the title. But it does have a nice relaxing, calming, sort of IDM vibe with its light melodies and simple snapping percussion. However, about halfway through, that track evolves in the most fluid way possible with some sporadic strings building up into this explosive, perpetually erupting beat with crashing snare and a more frantic melody, also being appropriate for the second title. Honestly, one of the highlights of this album for me. Great transition, great pacing, all around great song. Don't Shoot Me Down is quite the smooth, elegant track, and a bit of a deviation from the rest of the album so far. It's got a delicate R&B touch to it, the luscious guitar work, faint yet beautiful synth pops, and the plunky bass and percussion. It's got a very sexy nature almost, and I really enjoy it. I would absolutely love to hear some crooning over this instrumental. Just as it is, it feels like it's missing vocals, which I get is the point, but I just feel like this could be gorgeous with some passionate, soulful singer over it. By itself, it is still quite good. All Around You almost reminds me of a Blade beat. It has these cold, brittle synths stabbing and slashing all across the bubbly foundation and perambulating bass, all capped off with this typical rattly trap percussion. I will say though, I do enjoy how bright the synths are. I think they help to amplify the brisk and sharper feeling of the beat. I'm not huge on the sample used here though. It sounds like a clip out of a movie or a TV show of two characters arguing, and the only time it works is at the beginning when one of the screams is warped and modulated to transition into the drop. But the other times it comes in, it just sucks me out of the vibe, especially when it ends the track. For what it is though, it is nice, but it's not going to be one I return to all that much. Hostility really gives me lo-fi study beat vibes. It has this extremely relaxing, soothing melody resting over this pillowy synth foundation, very muted bass, and comfortable yet appealing percussion. This is another one that doesn't really give me too much to talk about. It's quite soft, and I would say if you're looking for a track to add to like a study beat playlist or something, there's really no better candidate on this album than this track. It Gets Better starts out with this vintage kind of popping and scratchy effect you get from like old VHS tapes or something, a sound that has always really worked with me, especially if it's more quiet like this one is. Anyway, the actual instrumental has a very similar vibe to the previous track, Hostility. It's smooth, it's relaxing, certainly another great addition to a lo-fi study beat compilation on YouTube, even if I do think that scratchy effect kind of takes away from that vibe. It's not prominent, but it does lurk and continue throughout the entire song. That being said, I like the mellow, watery guitar and sharp synth waves, plus the track has an end skit that strips back the beat, which I believe is actually a clip from a Game Grumps episode, which is really cool, especially since I watched them a lot growing up. But I would have preferred if it was shorter. It gets a little bit tedious, especially with this being one of the longer cuts here. It's fine for what it is, not bad. And finally, the closer, Barkley Park, much like That's All Folks, feels like it was perfectly catered towards this underground hip-hop scene. It's got that repeated vocal sample, it's got a very opulent, higher-pitched melody. I'm pretty sure there's a minor flute motif playing as well, which I'm a sucker for flute and hip-hop in general, so that works for me. The only thing I think that could deviate it away from that scene is the percussion on this track being a bit more prominent, and for me, that's not a bad thing. I personally think an engaging and commanding percussion can add a lot of replay value to a song, and this one sure has it. Quite a nice closing track. Overall, Training Sessions Volume 3 is an extremely solid album. It incorporates a bunch of different elements from several areas of hip-hop and fuses them together into an enjoyable and concise package. However, I do want to say right now that beat tapes aren't usually my favorite releases. I think they can express the amazing talent a producer has, but plain and simple, they're not the kind of music I usually flock to. I usually prefer some kind of vocals in my music. It's one big reason why I never really talk about like electronic or ambient, that sort of scene, and instrumental hip-hop albums pretty much always fall into that crowd for me. All that being said though, that does not mean this is bad. If you are more in tune with instrumental releases and love hip-hop beats, please give this a listen for yourself. It may just click with you more than it did for me. But with all that being said, I am still going to give this a solid 7 out of 10. Well guys, hope you enjoyed that review. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.